What if one man changed the entire game of rugby forever, crushing defenses as if they were paper walls? What if a single player could make an entire stadium fall silent, not from boredom, but from pure jaw-dropping disbelief? That man existed, and his name was Jonah Lomu. In the world of rugby, legends are born every season. Coaches build them, commentators crown them, fans immortalize them, but every few decades someone arrives who doesn't just become a legend, they become the standard by which all legends are measured. Jonah Lomu was that someone. He was not merely a rugby player, he was a phenomenon that the sport had never seen before and has never quite seen since. A wrecking ball wrapped in a jersey, a force of nature disguised as a human being. When Lomu ran with the ball, defenders didn't just fail to stop him, they were erased, sent flying, reduced to nothing more than footnotes in one of sport's greatest highlight reels. But this story is not just about destruction. It is about a young man from humble beginnings who carried the weight of a nation on his shoulders while quietly battling one of the cruelest hands that life can deal. It is a story of triumph, of pain, of resilience, and ultimately, of legacy. A legacy so powerful that even a decade after his passing, the rugby world still whispers his name with reverence. So stay with us, because today we are taking you through the full, unfiltered, epic journey of the greatest winger to ever set foot on a rugby pitch, Jonah Lomu. The story begins in Auckland, New Zealand in 1975. Jonah Lomu was born into a family deeply rooted in Polynesian culture, a culture that prizes strength, community, and identity. From the very beginning, Jonah was different. He didn't just grow faster than other children, he grew bigger, stronger, and more physically imposing in ways that seemed almost unfair to his peers. Rugby came naturally to him, as it does to so many New Zealand boys. But what Lomu brought to the game was something no coaching manual had ever accounted for. He combined the raw power of a prop forward with the explosive speed of a sprinter, two attributes that had, until that point, simply never coexisted in one body at that level. Coaches who worked with him in those early years didn't just see potential, they saw something that made them stop mid-sentence and stare. His work ethic matched his gifts. Lomu was not content to simply show up and rely on his physical advantages. He trained with intensity, studied the game, and developed a playing instinct that went far beyond brute force. By his teenage years, the rugby community in New Zealand was already buzzing. This was not just a promising young player, this was something else entirely. And when he made his international debut for the All Blacks at just 19 years and 45 days old in 1994, becoming the youngest All Black in history at that time, the rugby world got its first real warning of what was coming. If you had to choose one moment when Jonah Lomu became immortal, it would be the 1995 Rugby World Cup in South Africa. He was barely 20 years old, a kid who had just crossed into his second decade of life. At an age when most young men are still figuring out who they are, Lomu walked onto the world stage and proceeded to rewrite rugby history in real time. The tournament itself was already historic, set against the backdrop of post-apartheid South Africa, with Nelson Mandela watching from the stands. But within that extraordinary context, Lomu carved out a chapter that belonged entirely to him. His performance against England in the semi-finals is the stuff of legend. 4 tries, 4 crushing, unstoppable, terrifying tries. England's defenders, experienced, physical, international-level athletes, ran at him with everything they had, and he went through them, over them, around them. It didn't matter. Mike Catt found himself literally trampled underfoot as Lomu steamrolled toward the try line. The image became one of the most iconic in rugby history. The stadium went silent. Then it erupted. The world had just witnessed something it had no framework to understand. Rugby commentators scrambled for superlatives. Defenders shook their heads in disbelief, and a barely 20-year-old from Auckland stood in the end zone, chest heaving, as if he had simply done what he always knew he could do. After that tournament, rugby was never the same. To truly understand Jonah Lomu, you have to understand what it was like to face him, not watch him, face him. Because watching from the stands is one thing. Standing in his path with the task of bringing him down is something else entirely. He stood over 6 feet, 4 inches tall. He weighed around 265 pounds. and he ran the 100 meters in under 11 seconds. Read that again. A man of that size moving at that speed. The physics alone should have been impossible. But Lomu's playing style was not simply about power. Yes, the handoffs were bone-jarring. Yes, the contact was like running into a moving wall, but he also possessed a deceptive sidestep that caught defenders completely off guard. Just when they thought they had him lined up, he shifted, and they were grasping at air. He had vision, awareness, and rugby intelligence that elevated him far beyond a one-dimensional battering ram. Former opponents have described facing him as a uniquely humbling experience. You prepared, you game planned, you told yourself that today would be different, and then the ball reached his hands, and every strategy dissolved in an instant. There was only instinct, and instinct most days was not enough to stop Jonah Lomu. But here is where the story takes a turn that no sporting documentary can afford to skip. Because behind the unstoppable force on the pitch was a man fighting a battle that no amount of physical power could win. Jonah Lomu was diagnosed with nephrotic syndrome. Serious kidney condition that threatened to end everything. For a professional rugby player at the peak of his powers, the diagnosis was devastating. What followed was one of sport's most quietly heroic stories. He refused to let the disease define him. He managed his condition, continued competing, and returned to international rugby at a level that astonished medical professionals and fans alike. In 2004, he underwent a kidney transplant, receiving a donated organ from a close friend. The contrast between his image and his reality was striking. Here was a man that opponents feared stepping onto the field with, and yet privately, he was navigating the fragility of serious illness with courage and quiet dignity. He never sought sympathy, he never used his condition as an excuse. He simply kept going, and in doing so, he gave the world something rarer and more valuable than athletic greatness. He gave it an example of genuine human resilience. Jonah Lomu passed away in November 2015 at the age of 40. The rugby world mourned as one. Tributes poured in from every corner of the globe, from former opponents, from fans who had never met him, from children who had grown up watching him and dreamed of one day playing with half his power. His legacy goes far beyond statistics and highlights. Lomu transformed rugby union from a sport with a loyal but limited following into a genuinely global spectacle. He made people who had never watched a rugby match sit down and stare at their screens in disbelief. He inspired an entire generation of Polynesian athletes to see themselves represented at the highest level of world sport. He changed coaching philosophies, training methods, and the way teams built their squads. He was and remains the blueprint. Jonah Lomu's story is more than a sports story. It is a story about what happens when extraordinary talent meets extraordinary heart. He came from nothing and became everything. He dominated a sport at barely 20 and fought for his life at 30. He ran through walls, both literal and metaphorical, with the same ferocious determination. True greatness is not measured only in tries scored or records broken. It is measured in the way a life is lived, the obstacles faced, and the inspiration left behind. By every measure, Jonah Lomu was truly great. His legacy is not fading. If anything, it grows stronger with every year that passes, a reminder that some forces of nature are simply too powerful to ever disappear. If Jonah Lomu's story moved you, share this video with someone who needs to be reminded what real greatness looks like. And if you want more epic stories of the legends who shape the sports we love, subscribe to Rugby Warzone right now. We'll see you in the next one.